the American dream of the detached single-family home, that is being erased. That's no longer going to be permitted. Everybody, if you tell people you live in a single-family home, you are going to be a pariah.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thank you so very much for tuning in, and happy Veterans Day. A special thank you to all of those who have served our nation, and to those who have served our nation and have woken up to the fact that so many of the wars we have fought have been contrived bankers' wars. God bless you folks, especially for speaking out and speaking truth. We don't need any more wars. We don't need to go to war in Syria. We don't need wars in Iran. We certainly don't need a war with Russia. So God bless the truth tellers. And again, happy Veterans Day. On the line with me right now is our good friend Sofia Smallstorm. And for those who have braved these California fires, to me, another contrivance of the banksters. God bless you folks. I hope you haven't been burned out. And if you have, I pray that you can rebuild. We're not sure how that's going to shake out given UN Agenda 2030's strategy to herd us all into large cities. And, you know, Sofia's latest newsletter, her Avatar Update, really talks about this stuff specifically. And I'd like to read a passage from it in a second. But first, let me welcome Sofia. Hi, Sofia.
Hi, Sean. How are you? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for coming back on. You emailed me just the other day, and I wanted to squeeze you in here because I think what you have to say is important. And if I may, let me just read this from Current News Today, November 11th, as we're having this conversation. Of course, this comes from the New York Times. The title of the article is Rebirth, Angst, and the New Normal of California Wildfires. They just keep hitting us with this messaging, Sofia. This is the new normal. And as you wrote in your newsletter here, I thought this was a great newsletter. You were talking about being without power when PG&E decided to turn off the power for your safety. And you wrote, quote, "On my second powerless morning, deprived of the computer and sipping my gas stove heated cup of tea, I chanced upon a missed issue of Harper's Magazine from August 2018. And lo and behold, it had a huge double feature on wildfires." You go on. "The world is on fire," the article began. "Of the 4.5 million homes put at risk by wildfires in America in 2017, 2 million were in California. In sub-Saharan Africa, over 150,000 people die each year from wildfires. The two parts of the magazine feature addressed megafires in Missouri, Montana, and pine forests of Portugal, both of which burned more than 100,000 acres. Here's the juicy part, folks. Harper's admits before 1995, there was barely one megafire per year in the world, but in the last decade, there have been 10 per year. And Sofia, I think this is your addendum. Let's remind ourselves that aerosols containing aluminum began to be sprayed in the late 1990s. I could go on. I suppose people should read this awesome newsletter for themselves. Do you want to tell people how they can get it in case they do want to read it for themselves?
Yeah, the newsletter is by subscription and it goes out by snail mail, which enables people to read it carefully. You can snuggle up by the fire with a little dog biscuit and read it. And I send these out monthly. It's a minimum $50 donation per year. There is a tab. If you go to my blog, sofiasmallstorm.com, there's a little icon in the left margin that explains where to send the check or money order. And that's the way I do it. You know, it's snail mail hard copy. So you really concentrate and you don't get interrupted.
Well, what are your thoughts here on the fires? I mean, evidently Harper's wants us to understand that this is the new normal, just like the New York Times does. And I guess when you take into account UN Agenda 2030, it probably is the new normal, but I think it's a contrived new normal.
Sean, yes, definitely. In our community, we know that these fires are contrived. They're artificially created and inflamed. But what I wanted to get into in this from this Harper's article, things that I learned that I had never known before. And what I have found is that if you read an in-depth mainstream journalistic piece, if you have the eyes that we have in our community, you can really see very deeply into it and you can start connecting dots that you weren't aware of that even connected before. And that's why I wanted to write a newsletter on the fires, because we were in this red alert warning that they are giving us, and they're now deliberately shutting down power. Last year in November, they cut our power for 16 hours. They didn't tell us why. in my little community of neighbors and homes, we thought, oh, there's something going on with the grid. Yes, it was warm, but we didn't have fire conditions. But this year, they warned us ad nauseum beforehand that now we are in fire season. So October worldwide is fire season. This is the new normal, okay? And they're warning people in certain experimental testing grounds, in California is one, that you may have a wildfire, it may come and burn up your house, and we are going to cut the power because the new normal explanation is that it's downed power lines from the wind that start these fires in wilderness or scrubby or brushy areas. Now, Sean, back in the early 2000s, the 1990s, when we did have what I'll just call wildfires, we were told that it was arsonists, just these crazy people who would go and deliberately light a fire somewhere and then enjoy the result. But the arsonist explanation has evaporated. Now we're told downed power lines. So I looked this up. Why are downed power lines causing fires? Well, guess what? They don't insulate power lines. This is the norm in the utility world. They believe that air is an adequate insulator of high voltage power lines. When the power lines cross through, now get this, densely wooded areas, then they insulate them. So they won't insulate power lines that are just in open air. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's obscene, and they should probably be burying these power lines, but PG&E is going to use the excuse that I guess they don't earn enough money to be able to maintain their lines properly, which begs the question, Sofia, why is this happening only in California? I guess it's not, it's happening all over the country, but we only hear this about the power lines in PG&E. I guess it's not windy anywhere else in this country. There are no other neighborhoods burning to the ground every single year because of their power company. I mean, what's going on here with PG&E? I think you know, I think I know, but why don't you tell the audience?
Well, Sean, it's the eucalyptus tree. This is an import to California. It was also an import to Portugal. And this is why my newsletter, this particular analysis, is so different from what people might expect. So the eucalyptus tree is an extremely oily tree. It's an Australian native. Remember that song, Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree? That is the Tasmanian blue gum. And that was brought from Australia by a guy who was half Australian and half German to Europe, to Portugal. And it was brought to California and elsewhere in the world. To California, it was brought to build railroad ties. I learned this when I moved here. But it hasn't proved to be a very good construction wood. And what it's proved to be is a very good firewood. Very, very good. And let me start with Portugal, because Portugal and Missoula, Montana had in 2017, I believe this was an experimental proving ground, 2017, for some of these new theories about fire, the conventional theories, the cover story theories. And there were two huge megafires that were written about in this Harper's piece. Megafire is what burns more than 100,000 acres. And as you quoted from the newsletter and the article, in the last decade, we've had 10 megafires per year worldwide. But before 1995, we barely had one. So what is the causal agent of so much, let's call it fire-worthy, non-fireproofness in the world? There's an aluminum that's been sprayed by geoengineering plants, which is an accelerant, fire, combustible, conductive material on the ground, and it's absolutely saturated the flora and fauna everywhere. So let's just get into Portugal. Portugal is the country in the world right now, and they had a mega fire in 2017 in the month of June. They have 90% ownership of private ownership of forests. Okay, now let's put on our Agenda 21 hats. Portugal didn't have that, but forest ownership became popular in the 1800s when the government said to landowners, why don't you all plant some trees as a form of a savings account? And it wasn't just landowners, there were peasants, there were all kinds of people. Normal people started buying trees. And the eucalyptus came in because classically in Portugal, naturally you have the pine tree, which grows many, many countries. But pines are harvested every 30 to 40 years. And eucalyptus can be harvested every 10 years. They grow very, very fast. So when the Australian eucalyptus was brought to Portugal, the Portuguese people, if they owned a little bit of forest, their green savings account, they could have a harvest which would bring them a few thousand, today it's euros, every few years. So the government encouraged this. And what happened was that the new people, the new type of eucalyptus and pine owner was not clearing underbrush. And it's really underbrush that puts land at risk for fire, because especially when there are droughts, especially when there's artificial weather, very mild winters. So what has happened is in Portugal, lots of people have crops of trees, but they don't clear the what's called dog hair, the underbrush that grows, the spindly stuff on the ground. And with the eucalyptus trees in particular, they are very, very flammable because the eucalyptus oil in the leaves, it's even been used as a motor fuel. So the leaves are very thick, they grow in these crowns in these tall trees. And the eucalyptus bark, the eucalyptus is such a fast grower, it's like a perpetual adolescent. It's always shedding bark, shedding bark. And anyone who lives in California where there are tons of eucalyptus trees can see the bark just dangling, twisting in the wind. So I think they are conducting this experiment in California because it's so big, it's so full, now I'll mention this later, of immigrants and eucalyptus trees. So do you want to ask me any questions? Should I pause? I don't want to keep...
Let me jump in, because what I was driving at when I mentioned PG&E is I thought maybe you would bridge into smart meters. Let me read this from your article under Wind and Wilderness. By the way, we continue to be programmed by Harper's and the mainstream media that it's global warming that's the root of all of this. That's why we need to give up all our forms of energy, folks. We need to give up our gasoline-powered cars. We need to give up natural gas, coal. We can't heat our homes with these forms of energy. In the name of saving the planet, we have to give it all up under UN Agenda 2030, and it was previously called Agenda 21, as Sofia just mentioned. UN Agenda 21, UN Agenda 2030, same thing. Give it all up, all of our forms of energy. We need to live at, literally, in their words, 17th century living standards.
Because they claim in the climate action plans, usage must be reduced to 1750. This is back in the 1700s, where we did not use equipment or machinery to drop the greenhouse gas emissions effectively so that we can prevent the weather from changing.
So 17th century serfs is how they want us to live in the future in order to save the planet. And in your newsletter, Sofia, you quote Harper's, quote, "Wilderness has a better grasp of global warming than we do." This comes from writer Richard Manning. And then you wrote, here's what I was getting at when I mentioned PG&E. On the same page here in your newsletter, you wrote, "Strangely, in Santa Rosa and in Paradise, someone I happen to know inspected the houses that were left standing. And surprise, each of them had an analog meter, not a smart meter. In some videos I saw, the smart meters looked particularly scorched, as though the fires had started there. Smart meters, I am told, are not grounded, unlike analog meters, which have a special copper bar that connects to the building's electrical ground. Now, does that suggest something? A giant deliberate voltage spike that could easily torch the underground meter and go on to ignite the house? I'm just speculating. The arsonists we used to hear about have been replaced with uninsulated power lines. The wind and the wilderness are deploying fire to move us into safe, smart, urban homes." All right, I read quite a bit there, Sofia, but the point is, we've got eucalyptus trees, which you mentioned. We have aluminum spraying, which is certainly helpful in starting and spreading these fires. And then we have these smart meters. Do you want to talk a little bit about PG&E and these smart meters as being involved potentially in these contrived fires?
I can, but before I do that, Sean, I want to bring in the term that was so spectacular for me when I read it in this article, and I don't believe people in the alternative world are familiar with it because no one has ever used it to my knowledge before. It is called the WUI, and it's on page 5 of my newsletter, the bottom of page 5, left column, that's where you'll see it. WUI is WUI. It's an acronym for Wildland Urban Interface. So the reason the WUI is so important is because in the Western United States, that's where 2 million new homes have been built between 1990 and 2010. The Western United States is full of federal wilderness areas and federal forests, national forests. And let me point this out. Over the past decade or so, when we've had drought all over the West, and particularly California, Dane Wigington of Geoengineering Watch has correctly pointed out that all of our winter storms, they gather and congregate above us, but then they're shunted through artificial weather modification means, shunted over to the Midwest and the East. So the Western United States has been very, very dry. And all of the moisture, for instance, in Montana, the dog hair, the little spindly trees that grow at high elevations, the forest is at low elevation, the big trees. But the little trees are at high elevation, and they normally are fire resistant because they hold a lot of moisture and they hold snow. But what's happened over the last 10 years is this stuff has all dried out. And now you're getting these fires that start at the very edge of the national wilderness and the national forests. And they carry over into the WUI, the wildland-urban interface, where we are told by mainstream writers, such as these, that selfish people build houses so they can have nice views, wildlife walking around, and they can be far apart from their neighbors. And all this construction that's gone on in the WUI for the last 20, 30 years is the reason it is the ladder fuel, as the fire term goes. It carries the fire from the wilderness area to the urban areas. So the selfish people who built in the WUI, and I live in a WUI, by the way. WUI means anything that isn't like total stacked suburban houses, McMansions, or smaller duplexes. WUIs are places that, creative people might live in. But also the modern developer has built very close to national forests. And it's these tracts, these houses that they're calling ladder fuel, that port the fires from the wilderness that they'll tell us are naturally created, even if it's down power lines. They'll say this tends to happen. But now all you selfish, bad, unthinking people who've built in these fringe areas of the urban cities, you are carrying these fires into the lives of people who were smart and they built responsibly and they live in real cities. So it's the suburbs that are going to be threatened now increasingly, and we're going to be told, you better move out, you better move into the urban stack and pack housing. That's the Agenda 2030 plan, is to move us from the fringe developments that we live in into these urban centers. And the WUI, W-U-I, is probably going to become the generally used term for suburbs.
I love it when research from different researchers aligns and comes together. I just had Deborah Tavares on the other day. She mentioned the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface. You've picked up on it here, and it's so important. You write in your article here on page 5, can you hear Agenda 21 ringing loud and clear? Fools, now this is their narrative, fools are building houses where they shouldn't and are draining the federal fire budget when they need to be rescued. It gets better. Fire has become a social problem, the Harper's writer informs us, and fighting fires long-term is in fact a social process which will require enforced contractual terms. You can take it from there, but I would advise people to look at that UN Agenda 21 2030 Wildlands map, Sophia. I've been saying now for a very long time, I never believed that they could get people out of the wildlands. I never believed they could get people off their property. God bless somebody who owns 10 acres, 5 acres, or even an acre, a nice home with some woods. They don't want you there. They want you herded into large megacities. And these megacities are all part of the UN Agenda 2030 plan. Guys, look at the UN Agenda 2030 Wildlands map. They don't want us anywhere except in huge cities. Sophia?
Exactly. In Portugal, where they had this giant fire in June 2017, they have decided that wildfire is the new normal and the government is going to have to do something about this. That the people are irresponsible and they're the ones that cause the fires because the farmers secretly burn and the people don't clear the underbrush. So the Portuguese government has decided to get this very powerful and expensive emergency telecom network, right? So that's where we get telecom threading into all this. And they are telling the people that it was electricity discharges from the power lines that caused this Pedro Gao Grande fire. And I want to describe this fire, its layout, Sean, because this is very suspicious to me. 2:30 p.m., it starts somewhere in an oak grove because we're told the National Power Company had failed to prune back the upper branches of the trees. So then by 3 p.m., we've got 20-foot flames, and the rural firemen, who are all volunteer, they are chasing around trying to do something about this. But now, surprise, surprise, 2 miles away, another electrical fire begins at the same time, also by a downed power line. So we've got all these groves of eucalyptus and pine, very fire prone, and they tell us that the worst place you can be in a wildfire is on a hill. Hot air rises. So the fire that heats up the air, the starting fire, if it's near a hill, then the fuel, which is the trees and the underbrush, will get heated up and burn even more quickly and reactively than if it were on flat land. So in Portugal, you had these 2 spots that electrical fires started in at the same time, and then they started to move toward each other. And eventually they joined up by, I think it was 6 p.m. in this vortex, Sean. They were already crown fires, meaning they were burning the tops of trees where the wind blows the fastest. And then, are you ready? 6 p.m., oh, we have an electrical storm. We don't know where it came from. This is most unfortunate because now the winds are shifting and increasing, and this is causing a blow up of the fire. So the fires burn with such intensity at this point that you can't use hoses on them. And now the heat is the force of the fire is being measured in kilowatts, not temperature, because these hydrocarbon wood fires, they will top out at 600 degrees Celsius, maybe, that's like in the thousands Fahrenheit, and they might reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit max. But then if they're raging, you can imagine, now we're talking volume, they're burning at 20,000 kilowatts per meter, and you have to stop using water at 10,000 kilowatts per meter because it's not going to work anymore. So these fires met at, it was 7:30, and they met where the V, the point of the V, and that's when they create convection forces, explosions. But my contention is, if you study technically and scientifically the way that fire works, and you have all these means of artificially creating wind and electrical issues wherever you want them. Like, remember in Santa Rosa and Paradise, people reported these flashes in the sky, right? So you could definitely add to that scenario, and you could build a cataclysmic fire that you're calling wild, where that actually converges in this convection explosion. And in Harper's, they write this line, which I thought was very telling. The explosion of the fire was the consequence of complex interactions between the 2 fires themselves, the ones that were approaching one another, and then between the fires and the sky.
Well, it's frightening because when you know what we know about the UN Agenda 2030 strategy, because I don't know that I completed my thought when I mentioned that map, what I've been saying for a long time, maybe I did say this, but I'll say it again. I didn't know how they could get people off the lands. I didn't know how they could get people to agree to this anti-human strategy, right? It wasn't going to work, in my view. This UN Agenda 2030 strategy is completely anti-human. It's completely against private property. It's against our sovereign rights as human beings. So how would they get people to go for it? How would they get people to acquiesce their rights to this anti-human strategy? And Sophia, I never accounted for these fires. I mean, these people Boy, well, we get into the area of speculation here, but I think if you take the preponderance of the evidence, we are being attacked. This is actually a plan being carried out. And when we say that these fires are contrived, we mean that the arsonists are these same people that want us off the lands in the name of UN Agenda 2030. Am I overstating it, or is that exactly what's going on here?
No,
The real arsonists are these New World Order globalists that are now implementing UN Agenda 2030 strategies in California.
Sean, yes, because they're telling us, if you can believe it, that the people who build in the WUI, thousands of irresponsibly built homes, constitute the latter fuel that will destroy houses in otherwise safe areas. And they told us that the reason the houses burned in Santa Rosa was, bad choices in shingles.
Yeah, I see that in your article. And you write, these aren't forest fires. They're subdivision fires running house to house, fueled by, in your italics, bad choices in shingles, right? So these are accidental fires, they would have us believe, from power lines that are outdated because the infrastructure is falling apart, and that's our fault, that's not PG&E's fault. And then when your house burns to the ground, meanwhile, flora around you is untouched, the trees are fine, but your entire neighborhood is burned to the ground, as happened in Santa Rosa. It's your fault. You had bad shingles.
Sean, I don't want to use the word hilarious because this is way too serious to throw terms like that around, but I watched on television with my own eyes a house burning just like 2 weeks ago when they had those fires. This was the Sepulveda Basin in Los Angeles, and there's a big old tract home, right? And it's burning, it's in flames. And the anchor has the gall to say that a flying ember has entered the house from the wind, a wind-borne ember, and the whole thing has gone into flames. So they're telling us that these suburban houses that are burning from the inside out are burning because we had cheap building materials by the developers. So come on. I believe that the analog versus smart meter has something to do with this. These smart meters scorch, they're not grounded. The analog meter has this 3-inch copper bar. And actually, I am now working with a company that makes a power box that wires into your smart meter, not your smart meter, wires into your electrical panel. And it can save your house from a giant voltage spike. That's what it's designed to do. So if you would contact me personally, I can help you get one of these. They're not cheap, but they remediate all your dirty electricity. They're excellent. And I think this is a very good form of insurance against the possibility, if you live in a WUI in an experimental place like California, against your house burning to the ground. Now, I wanted to say something. I put a couple of little conclusive lines here that I drew from the article, and this is tongue-in-cheek, right? Mm-hmm. So the article said, wilderness deploys death and fire to prepare the way for whatever is to come. That's their line. My line is, wilderness deploys death and fire as a consequence of global warming. Now, fire is the virus that has mutated out of climate change. And building smart is the vaccination against wildfire, this virus. So that's the equation right there. You know, we've got fire because of global warming and climate change. You need to build smart. Don't you go and build in the WUI, because you'll just become ladder fuel. And they might penalize people. They want to do these county mandates, these measures where they'll make houses in the WUI be very, very strictly regulated. That's the intermediary stage before they forbid the building of these houses altogether. So I want to suggest here that the American dream of the detached single-family home, that is being erased. That's no longer going to be permitted. Everybody, if you tell people you live in a single-family home, you are going to be a pariah. They might build multiplexes where these houses have been carefully, individually taken out, torched, scorched, burned to the ground, like in Paradise, Santa Rosa. They might build multiplexes for immigrants. Immigrants are very used to living in a very condensed space, 12 to a room or whatever. Or they might just say, nope, everybody has to live in stack and pack in these towers in the cities that they're planning. So they're deploying fire as this virus out of climate change. And we have to not feed those fires. That's what they're telling us with our choices, our personal, private choices.
You know what, Sophia? They've been telegraphing this plan in movies since I was a kid. All of these dystopian, futuristic movies like Blade Runner. Folks, go watch Blade Runner, the original one with Harrison Ford, and then watch the new remake. Those stack 'em and pack 'em, high-rise nightmare cities have been shown to us in movies since we were children. And you write something here at the end of your piece that I want to read because, I mean, you basically just said it, but I think it's very sad. It's why we're having this conversation. The American dream of the detached single-family home is being erased. Will we get in its place multiplexes built for waves of immigrants? Or will we all just be shunted into stack and pack towers in the cities? You and I may be on to what's happening, but ordinary folk will surely never know. And there's the rub, Sophia. That's why we're having this conversation, because we have to inform people to what's going on here. And the good news is I think people are waking up. The bad news is their plan is so nefarious and so widespread and captured under this label of sustainability that it's moving out across the nation in cities where people listening to this are living. You don't have to live in California to be affected by this sustainable development plan, UN Agenda 2030, folks. It's happening right now. The question is, Sophia, how do we fight it? What do we do?
Well, Sean, we can commingle with each other and we can discuss it. And I have started to fight it, as you put it, with the smart meter information. I'm trying to get people to go back to the analog meters. We have an opt-out here. If you cannot get out of your smart meter, then you can buy this power box. You can contact me and I'll explain to you how to get one. You have to have an electrician wire it in, but you can save your house. It lets me sleep at night, that I don't have to worry quite so much. I have an analog meter. I fought for that through the opt-out. But there are things we can do, but mainly you have to get, I got through to somebody in our city of where I live, and he's listening to me. And I'm not going to mention his name, but I am proud to say that he paid attention. And if you can make a friend of somebody on the city council and explain this to them, because they all have houses that might burn, or they're all subject to these regulations. And, I want to tell everyone, remember when you did the interview with Anita Whitney, who was so on to the commerce and contracts? She pointed out to me, she has died since, I'm sorry to say, in this past summer. But she pointed out to me that it is not we the people that these city council members and political officials, local officials represent. They're representing a corporation which exists to do commerce and contracts.
Right. That's exactly what Deb Tavares said. There's no stopping this because the United States has been corporatized. We're essentially being run by corporations. That's what these people in these city councils need to understand, I guess, right? That's what your friend understands?
Yes, they need to. No, I'm not sure he understands it, but he is understanding the real nature of what these cities are all about. They're all about conferring and conforming to a global agenda which puts money in their coffers. I mean, all of this building, in some of our cities, they're building not only fancy train stations that look like they're from the next century, but they're building these abutments on the streets, tons of bike lanes. And these abutments, which mean that if you're a car, you have to slow down to 20 miles an hour because the sidewalk sticks out periodically, and you're not going to be able to get by another car coming in the opposite direction unless you're traveling extremely slowly and assessing where that other car is. That's all Agenda 21. And I wrote a newsletter on the roads in America. They are letting the rural roads, they're not even repaving them. They are quoting, we don't have the budget to put asphalt on these country roads. What they really want is they want people who live in the country not to live there anymore, because you can't drive a vehicle on roads where a piece of gravel is going to break your windshield or it's going to ruin your car's suspension, right? And they're going to do that in the suburbs too. They will start letting the suburban roads go to seed because they don't want you living there. So we should be mindful of how they're going to make the suburban life extremely uncomfortable. And we should discuss that with each other. But right now, my neighbors are not aware of this. My neighbors thought it was cool to go and get ice so they could preserve their food in the freezer. My neighbors think it's cool to take your important documents with you when you run an errand when there's no power. They think this is all the modern, sustainable, libtard mindset, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have to get to the point where they don't see this as cool.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, if they think this is cool, right? If they think somehow they're just temporarily inconvenienced, right, in the name of these fires, if they think it's fun and cool just because this is a temporary inconvenience, they're in for a horrifying awakening. Because again, they keep telling us this is the new normal. And I don't think the people who think this is fun and cool have any idea the hell on earth that's coming by 2030 and beyond. 2050, by the way, Bill Gates innovating to zero emissions by 2050, sustainability. They're not going to replace our current forms of energy, folks. The plan is not to lift the third world up to first world living standards, Sophia, as you know. It's to drag the first world down to third world living standards. Thereby, we're all equal. That's equality. The new equality on planet Earth under UN Agenda 2030 is you're all serfs, you're all poor, then everyone's equal.
Right. And the government, this is, I have become friendly with Patrick Wood, who has written amazing books on this, on technocracy. But the technocrats, Sean, were all about no waste. The technocratic movement started in the 1930s, as explained by Wilton Ivey, who was one of their card-carrying members. In his writings, he says, we do not want waste. And so they have deployed technological means of measuring energy. This is why you have all this spying being done and surveillance, because they want to record how much we use everything so that we don't waste anything. And they tell us very misleadingly that if we contain the use of energy, then we will all live in abundance, right? Mm-hmm. But you and I know that if we contain the use of energy, then we're just going to make you contain it more, and we're going to fine you. There won't be any abundance. You'll just be under our control. That's so technocracy translates to government by skill, government by science. They don't want any elected officials eventually, because people, they don't make good decisions, right? This is the whole, they didn't make good decisions by developing the WUI. Now we can't have any people making any decisions. AI will make all the decisions. And this is the reason for 5G, Sean, because 5G allows an instant, real-time picture of everything you're doing with no latency. The use of millimeter waves on light, the medium of light, to convey information means there is no lag time between one device transmitting and another device receiving. So the perps, the technocrats, the arsonists, the powers that be are going to be sitting in ivory towers with AI receiving every iota of information about us, so that our lives are modeled in real time right in front of their eyes. They can just pull up where you are, what you're doing. Did you wash your hands after you flushed the toilet? Details like this. And it's for instant, complete reporting, so that we can start segregating the society into tiers. Who is acceptable, who is not. This is why everything becomes social. Everything.
That sparked another movie, more Hollywood programming. Go check out that Matt Damon movie, Elysium. You guys want to see what the future is under this plan that Sophia just aptly described? Go watch Elysium. That's the plan. All right, Sophia. Well, they've weaponized everything. They'll have us believe that carbon is bad, even though trees breathe it and emit oxygen. They've just weaponized absolutely everything against us. And you wanted to share a little information about light bulbs. Do you want to do that before we part ways?
Yes, Sean, I've got a few new products in my store, avatarproducts.com, and I've been working with this electrical engineering company. And human innovation will always be there to some extent. I don't know that everybody will be innovative, but I now have on my website, it's right on the front page, it's an LED light bulb, but it's so different from the normal LEDs. First of all, it doesn't burn out your photoreceptors. as the normal LED does, which is 2 white and 2 blue. This is full spectrum, and it is very efficient, much more even than an incandescent bulb, putting out no dirty electricity, no harmonics, very good on the eyes, good on the mood. And the fact is that they last a very, very long time. So they're dimmable. They are the equivalent of 60 watts. They even have a recessed version, which I haven't received yet, but those will be on the site very soon. But definitely these bulbs, you know, northern latitudes where you live, in the winter, sometimes you have these very cloudy days, day upon day, and your body isn't getting enough sunlight. It's not getting the full spectrum of light that it needs. So I sent my mother a couple of these bulbs for one of the rooms in her house that's wood paneled and very dark, and she loves them. You're getting full spectrum light in the winter, and I think these would be very good gifts for friends and relatives who live in the north if you don't live there yourself. But definitely the full spectrum good LED. And here's the point. Here's a company that made not a bad LED that will blind you, a good LED. So we can actually invent ways around this. We can invent solutions. And I'm very proud to be associated with these people. And I'm hoping so much that listeners will buy these bulbs and try them out. They're very long lasting.
Yeah, I see them on your page here. This is great. All right, new full spectrum LED light bulbs. All right, guys, I don't get a nickel from anything Sofia sells, but if you want to support her, please, by all means, do. The website is avatarproducts.com. Correct, Sofia?
Yes, it is, Sean, and thank you. And also, we have a product that I designed called a bed warmer. It's lower down on the page, and if you're cold at night, this thing will keep you toasty. It's non-electrified. It's a no-brainer. You can read about it, but definitely bed warmers, great gifts for older people, and if you're cold at night. And thank you, Sean. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to have you back on. We need to keep talking about UN Agenda 2030. This is the most diabolical plan that I can point to right now. 5G is a huge problem. It's all part of the same problem, but UN Agenda 2030, we have to wake people up to these plans. Sustainability, it's a catch-all phrase, and it's an anti-human plan. They want to take away your rights, your energy, your ability to heat your home, and in fact, your entire home. They want you out of it. They want you in big stack 'em, pack 'em cities. UN Agenda 2030. Share this information, folks. Give this video a like, and please, by all means, share it within your sphere of influence on social media. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. You know how much we appreciate it. Oh, one last word. If you guys want to take a bite out of Google, which spies on you, stop using Google Chrome. Use the Brave browser. It's more than twice as fast, and it will never, ever spy on you. And guess what? It's got a built-in ad blocker. That's the Brave browser. It's free to download. I'll leave the link below. Download it, install it on your computer, and give it a try. I know you'll love it. It's fantastic. All right, guys, and for real news 24/7, you can always visit us at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless. Bye-bye.
What everyone needs to clearly understand is what is occurring. What is occurring is a restriction of all resource consumption above what is needed to supply vital human needs. And that restriction is saying anything above vital human needs is immoral, and that the human population must be reduced, because they claim in the climate action plans usage must be reduced to 1750. This is back in the 1700s, where we did not use equipment or machinery.